Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Pratt, and I'm here to talk about Introduction to Lighting Design as it pertains to the students going to state. A little bit about myself. I received my Bachelor of Science in Theater from South Dakota State University in Brookings, South Dakota. I went on to work very briefly in New York. Decided I wanted to go back to school. I got my MFA in lighting design from Wayne State University. Since then, I've worked at a number of colleges. As many of you know, I most recently have been working at Camplex in Gillette, and most recently, I am now working down in Orlando, Florida, as the ride and show lighting supervisor at Universal Studios. So here we go. I'm first going to talk about a little bit about the basics of the controllable properties of light. There are 4 controllable properties of light. The first one is distribution. Distribution is defined as the direction the light is physically coming from, whether it be front light or side light or down light. Shape, which is where the light falls on the stage. If you're cutting it off from if you're shuttering it off from the side, if it's a square or a rectangle or whatever, like the physical shape of the light. Size, which is how much of the stage the light is covering. And quality, which is how fuzzy or sharp the light is. The second controllable property is color, which is either the presence or absence of color, and the interactions of those colors. The third one is intensity, which is how bright or how dim the light is on stage. And the fourth one is movement, which is either a change in intensity, either something getting brighter, something getting darker, a change of focus on stage, that is to say if the light's coming down in one area and coming up in a different area, or the physical movement of a light via a moving head fixture or a moving mirror fixture. I bring up these controllable properties of lights because these are sort of the basics behind all design. You really need to keep all these in mind when you're really thinking about how you want the lights to interact with everything else going on in a show. And so I'm going to go over the design process. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer, this is my design process, and my design process is not law. There is no such thing as a set in stone design process. The one that I'm going to be talking about is sort of widely accepted. And it was obviously it's what was taught to me, and it was what was taught to my professors, and so your students don't necessarily have to follow this as if it's the letter of the law, but it makes the most sense to me, and it's something that I think will help give your students direction, and will make their lives a lot easier. Obviously, the first thing after you choose a play or to choose a show is to read it. Read it 3 times. The first time you read it is to just read the show and see what's going on, what you're getting yourself into. The second time is to pick out specifics. If there's anything in the show that specifically says there's a lighting effect here, you should probably make note of that. And then the third time is just in case you miss anything. Every show I have done, I have always read 3 times for this exact reason. The next one is, that's great. Figuring out artistic direction. This is usually done by the director. For example, if the director decides you are doing Shakespeare and they want that Shakespeare to be steampunk, that would be your artistic direction. I'm just going to go through these as an overview, and I'll talk more in depth about all of these as we go along. The next step is collaboration. This is where you'll get together with your other designers and the director to form a unified design. Research. After you've picked out a unified design, then you start research. This is where you bring your photos. This is where your design, the thing you write that says this is what your design means. All of this happens at this point. The next piece of paper you generate is the lighting key. This is literally the basis of every other piece of paperwork you will create. And is a very very simple lighting document, and I'll show you guys how to make one of those. Next is the lighting plot, which obviously is the bread and butter of the lighting design. Tells you all of the technical details of what's going on, and then finally is all of the paperwork that you generate after you're done with that, which includes the magic sheet, the channel hookup, and a cue sheet. So let's talk a little bit about show selection. The main thing about show selection, especially for your first, second, and third year students, is to not, well, really for all your students, is to not pick a show that's overly complicated. Try to pick a simpler script. Try to pick a one act if you can, because the problem is that the bigger the script, the more difficult their time is going to be, and the greater the expectations is going to be on them. Points 1 and 2 are pretty poignant here. It's much easier to explain a 50-page script to a judge than it is to explain a 200-page script. On the same note, it's also easier to read a 50-page script 3 times than it is to read a 200-page script 3 times. The big note on number 3 is try to stay away from musicals. Musicals are wonderful. Musicals are great, especially for lighting designs. I love designing musicals. They are so much fun. However, they are a lot of work. And the expectations that come with that are huge. As an example, when I designed The Full Monty, which is a fantastic musical, by the time I was done, I had about 600 cues for that show. Simply because it's, you have anywhere between 12 and 20 songs in a musical, and I, as a judge, would expect, especially of fourth years who have to write all of their cues down, I would expect at least a cue per shift in tone for every song. If you had 20 songs, and let's say you only had 3 shifts of tone in a song, you're already talking about 60 cues that you have to write down on your cue sheet. And that gets very difficult and very time consuming. I will show you guys how to make a cue sheet, but I'm warning you right now, bigger shows are going to be much harder, especially musicals, because that expectation is going to be much, much higher. And the fourth point, you can't always force your kids to read the show, but a lot of the lighting information is directly in the script. If you're doing a show that's in a house, my guess is at some point there's going to be some sort of direction that says they turn on a lamp, they turn on the lights, and all of those will help you sort of define what is actually going to go in your design. And all of those things should be mentioned when you're writing your descriptions. Next step, the direction. The purpose of this, obviously, is to come up with a design that makes sense, and to come up with the direction of your design. There are a few ways you can do this. Traditionally, the coach acts as the designer, and that's perfectly okay. The designer can also act as the director, which is also perfectly okay. The one that I like the most is the third one, is if you can create a design team out of all of your kids that are doing different areas, and making them collaborate on a show. So if you have someone doing costume design, someone doing scenic design, someone doing lighting, someone doing PR, have them all work on the exact same show so that they can get together and come up with a unified design. The judges don't necessarily see that, but I can guarantee you it will make their lives much easier, because if you have a direction to move, everything else sort of falls into place. And then the fourth one is, if you have a student who is doing all of those things, is to have them do the same show. I ran into a few kids who did this last year, and I think that's a fantastic idea, because it gives them the freedom to come up with a single design and sort of do the entire thing and complete it from beginning to finish, and I really like that. Next step is your research. This is where you come up with your design concept. The design concept should obviously start with a brief 2 to 3 sentence description of the show. I say 2 to 3 sentences because there were a lot of design concepts where half of the page was taken up by the description of the show. which really left them a very small amount of space to talk about their actual lighting design. And for some kids, this can be very difficult because lighting is it's a very ephemeral art, where it's you really don't get to see, as a lighting designer, you don't get to see the product of your labors until the show is almost done. And so this part is a little bit harder, but really one thing that you need to impress upon your kids is the idea of all you're doing is describing what you see. Like I say on the PowerPoint, should cover how you see the show being lit. Use great flowery words, describe the colors that you see, describe the feelings that the show makes you feel, and that's really what you should be talking about. You should definitely pick 2 or 3 very important scenes in the show and describe how they look and how they make you feel and how the lighting does that. A quick example would be if you're talking about the death scene in Romeo and Juliet, where Romeo and Juliet are dying together. You can talk about how you want the pinks to represent the love that these 2 children had for each other, and that the merging of the pink with the blue is the combination of the 2 souls, and eventually you want to end in a nice purple as sort of that mixing of the 2 kids and their love for each other, something like that. That's obviously a little simplistic, but it's that sort of flowery language, how it makes you feel, along with what you want it to look like, is really the purpose of your design concept. And then you should also always try to tie it into the direction that you designed the show. If you were talking in your design concept how you want the show to feel very warm, and you want the show to feel very nostalgic, and then you use a lot of bright greens, there's definitely going to be a bit of a disconnect there. And so definitely make sure that the description matches what the rest of the show. And then the second part of your design concept is your research, your actual research. Accompanying each of the scenes that you describe should be at least 2 to 3 pictures of what you described. It doesn't have to be exact. You don't have to, if you're looking for, if it's the inside of an apartment scene, you don't necessarily have to go find pictures of insides of apartments. But it should be something that represents the feeling and the color that you're talking about. The example that I put up there is if you're talking about the importance of a sunset in a show, that you need to have pictures of the sunsets and the colors that you talk about. If you feel you want the sunset to be very inviting and very warm and very orange and sort of bring out the warmness of the end of the show. The characters resolve their conflict, and now it's nice and warm and inviting. Your pictures should show that. And then you should have 2 to 3 pictures per look you describe. So if you describe 2 of those scenes, you should probably have 4 to 6 pictures. If you describe 3 of those scenes, you should probably have 6 to 9 pictures. A good example is here are my orange sunsets, my very inviting, very nice pictures that I could tie into the ending of my show. The other thing I noted, I said it very briefly on my number 3, do not use black and white pictures. Lighting, color is most of the importance of a light, or the absence of color, and black and white is very hard to justify. I'm not saying it's impossible to justify it. You could somehow get away with that, but I would highly advise against it. Because your explanation is going to have to be rock solid as to why you're using a black and white photo, for me to really be okay with that. That's just a little bit of an extra note. Your next step should be your ground plan. Not to be confused with your light plot. Your ground plan literally just shows the theatrical structure. and the scenic elements of the show. And this is what it should really look like. All of my drawings that I'll be showing you will have been done in Vectorworks. They don't have to be. They can be hand-drawn. That's perfectly okay. But the examples that I have are all in Vectorworks. And so really what you should be showing in your ground plan is the theater architecture, the walls of the theater, the edge of the stage, the front of the stage. You should include soft goods if they are important to the show. If you look on this one, the next picture will be a little more clear, but if you look on this one, you can see the curtains sort of on the sides, and then all of the teasers over top, as well as all of the scenic structures. And they have this set of stairs here, you have a door here, 2 platforms. I don't recall exactly what show this was, but and those are the important parts of your ground plan. An important note is that your ground plan is still required when you create your light plot. According to the rules, you need both, and not on the same piece of paper, because they are technically 2 different documents. So be aware of that when your kids are making their ground plan, and then when your second-year kids start making their light plot, is they need one piece of paper that is just the ground plan, and then one piece of paper that is the light plot. The ground plan should be on your light plot, but they should still be 2 different documents. And I'll talk about what'll go on the lighting plot as soon as we get there. Here's another good example of a ground plan. All it has is the back structure of the theater, the back wall, the front edge of the stage, and then the scenic elements. This designer actually broke down their scenic elements by scene. Each color is actually a different set of scenes that took place on them. You don't have to do that, but it's things that should appear on your ground plan are labels of what everything is, because it's very difficult for me to tell the difference, like what this little line is. I don't know what that is. Oh, it's a stud wall. Okay, so that's a little wall that goes right there. Here's a little box in the corner. It's labeled radiator. It must be a radiator. Things like that are sort of important to let whoever is looking at it know what's what. The next piece of information that you will be creating is the lighting key. The lighting key is defined as it's literally just a quick capture of all of your general lighting boiled down into one diagram. It represents the direction and the color of all of the general lighting that you're going to put on stage. It should be a very simple drawing. It really should just be a circle, some arrows, and some color designation. And pretty much everything you will be creating will come from this piece of paper, and I'll show you what that means when I'm going to do a sample lighting design after I get done with all of this part. Here is a basic lighting key. This lighting key is one set of lights, one direction, one color. You have the person or your focus area. Whoops, go back. Your direction that the light is coming from, and the color that it is. This is the basis of every lighting key. So a completed lighting key would look something like this. I have 2 sets of side light coming from stage right. I have 1 set of side light coming from stage left. This is the universal symbol for downlight. It's a side and then down, as opposed to just a straight back arrow, which would be backlight. I have 2 sets of diagonal lights and then 2 sets of front light, and then each one has with it whatever color is going to accompany those directions. So obviously I have 2 front lights. One's in a light lavender, one's a light blue. I have my 2 diagonals. One's a yellow, one's a darker blue. I have my stage left side light is sort of a purple. My stage right side light is a deep blue and a deep red, and then my down light is sort of a blue-green. And now from this document, we will pull all of the necessary information we need to create every other piece of of lighting documentation that we need. I highly, highly, highly suggest that this is where everyone stop. A lot of, especially newer designers, really want to start at the light plot, but the light plot can be horribly overwhelming, and this should really be your starting point. Where you really sit down and say, okay, what do I actually want on stage? I want one color of front light. I want 2 colors of side light. I want 1 color of down light. And that's what you should put on your lighting key, and that's as far as you should go for now. Then when you go to start making your plot, you can start taking that information for every, and then the second point is, for every arrow on your lighting key, you will need corresponding lights on your light plot. So for every one of these arrows, you are going to need a system of lights. So for these 2 sets of front lights, I'm going to need between 3 to 6, depending on how much coverage I want on my stage, sets of lights that are in R51, and then 3 to 6 lights that are R65 coming from the front. And that's really what this represents. And that'll make more sense when we actually get to the light plot. So the light plot. I'll show you guys more in depth about how to create this and where all of this information comes from and goes when I'll actually create a light plot for you, and we'll do this step by step. But for now, I'm just going to go through all of the information because there's a lot of information that needs to be on your light plot. The first thing that should be on your light plot is a title block. The title block should go in the bottom right corner and should contain the show title, the designer name, the date, and the scale. This is one that I did in grad school. It has my name as the designer. It has the scale, which is a 1/4 inch. It has the show title, Full Monty. And then obviously the date, which was 2011. All of that is important information. The rest of this information is useful but not necessary. The reason why this number exists is if you have multiple pages, you should label what page is what, and then the director name and I have my master electrician name on there as well, but that's not necessary for what you guys are doing. The next piece of information that absolutely should be on your light plot is the reference key, the legend. This should go in your bottom left corner of your plot and should have all of the lights that you are using and an explanation of what they are. So all of these symbols are in this light plot. And next to each symbol is an explanation of what it is. So this symbol means it's a source 410 degree. This symbol means it's a source 419 degree. This symbol is an ETC source 4 Parnell. This symbol means it's an Altman 6-inch Fresnel. And this is more of a quick reference for someone who doesn't know what they're looking at, or if you're using non-standard symbols. This is a way for someone to say, I don't know what this symbol means. Where's the legend? Oh, here's the legend. This symbol means it's a source 4. That's great. Okay. And that's really all that's for. I never assume that the symbols you are using are the ones that everyone else uses. Yes, you should be using the USITT ANSI standard symbols, but not everyone does, and so the legend sort of alleviates that confusion. When you actually start making your plot, this is when I was talking about the ground plan, is you should have a light outline of the relevant architecture of the theater as well as a light outline of your ground plan. If you're using CAD software, this is very easy to do because you can just move everything to the back layer and make it a lighter shade. If you are hand drafting all of these, you should be using a lighter color lead. If you're using a basic like an H4, you should be going down to an H2 to draft out your set, because then it's just the lighter darkness of the lead represents that it is less important, but it is still important. You should also have all of the lighting positions, as well as the lighting instruments that go on those positions, and then any specials or practicals when you actually start putting all of your lighting units on there. Practicals, again, do I have any on this one? I don't. The standard symbol for a practical is a triangle. and just put that on your legend. It really doesn't matter what symbol you use for practical as long as it's on your legend, if that makes sense. All of your electrics need to be labeled as well. All of your lighting positions need to be labeled. Sort of the standard for that is if you have your plaster line, which is the line that connects your prosceniums, where usually your upstage, downstage distances are measured from. It's usually where your main drape falls. If it is upstage of the plaster line, you start with the first pipe that's upstage, and that's your first electric, and then the one behind that is second electric, and so it goes from your plaster line upstage, and the opposite, if you have things out in the house, it's usually from the plaster line towards the back of the house. So the one closest to the plaster line would be your first front of house position, next one would be second front of house position. If you have box booms, you usually label them the same direction or the same way. The first two, if you have a box boom left and a box boom right, would be box boom 1, house left, box boom 1, house right, so on and so forth. Labeling your positions is incredibly important. One, because it's one of the requirements for the information on each lighting unit, as well as your channel hookup. Also, it alleviates a lot of confusion when you're looking for specific lights. Another good example, I don't have it on this one, is if you have a lighting grid, is to still be sure to label each pipe on your grid. Grids are a little bit trickier because you generally don't have a plaster line, but with grids, pick one direction and go that way. If you want all of your horizontals to be numbers and all of your verticals to be letters, that's perfectly acceptable. Just pick a naming convention and stick with it. So if you have, let's say you have a grid of 6 pipes that are all like this, with 6 more pipes that go like this. If you want to label all of your vertical pipes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you want to label all of your horizontal pipes A, B, C, D, and E, that's perfectly acceptable. And then whatever pipe you physically hang the light on is the pipe you label that light with. So if you have pipe 4 and pipe D, and you physically hang the lighting unit on pipe 4, when you're writing that information on the lighting unit, the position would be pipe 4. If that makes sense. I'll absolutely answer questions, because the lighting positions can get a little confusing, especially if you have a non-standard house. The next thing about all of your lighting instruments need to contain the following information. They need to have the channel, they need to have the color, they need to have the focus or purpose, depending on how you want to label it. Usually focus and purpose are the same thing. They don't have to be. The unit number of the light, which I'll explain what that is when I actually make the lighting plot, and then the dimmer number. Most of this information you can put in the color and the focus is already defined by your color key as you go through and make all of that information. The dimmer, for the purpose of the competition, is sort of irrelevant as long as it has a number. And then we'll talk about channels when I go through the examples and actually make a light plot, and it'll make a lot more sense. And then once you've created your light plot and your key, the next piece of paperwork you should be generating is a magic sheet. A magic sheet is basically just a cheat sheet of all of your lighting systems, usually broken up by color and direction. So when you looked at my lighting key and you saw that one arrow of front light, this is what that arrow of front light would look like on this show. So this is my magic sheet. All it is the direction. So here's my front light, the color, so it's that R51 again, and then each of these numbers are actually channels, and each of these areas are the area that each light is covering. So for this, if you were to look at this light plot, there would be 16 lights dedicated to being front light and R51 that are pointed in these specific areas. And the magic sheet is actually the piece of paper that I would take to the light board to actually write my cues, because it's how I would say, oh, I need a front light in the center of the stage. All right, well, that would be channel 8, because that's the one that's center stage and is a front light. In the same token, here's my diagonal light that's in an RO3, which is a nice light amber, that's only covering 9 areas, which means there are only 9 lights coming from this direction. And then these are the channels that represent this direction and this color. And this is information that's pulled directly from your plot. Your Magic Sheet is really just moving information from your light plot to a separate piece of paper that's just organized differently. And I'll go through that as well when I actually make a light plot. The next piece of paper is your channel schedule. Like most things, the channel schedule is all of that same information, just organized differently. This is really just a spreadsheet of all of the information just put in on all of your lights, as well as on your Magic Sheet, just laid out in a regular spreadsheet, just a text document. But all of this information should be on your channel schedule. It should include channel number, the dimmer number, the color, if you're using a gobo, the focus, and the purpose. The reason why it has focus and purpose is because sometimes they aren't always the same. For example, practicals don't have a focus, but they do have a purpose. But a lot of the times, the way that I label the difference between focus and purpose is if I have a front light that's pointed at focus area B, I will put B as that focus, but its purpose is a front light or a front wash. And so it's usually the focus is the data and the purpose is the artistic, if that makes sense. And I'll talk about that a little more when I make the plot. Next should be instrument number, then instrument location, aka what electric is it on or what position is it on, the wattage of the light, and then any special notes. And so here's what this should really look like, or something similar, where you have your channel number, dimmer number, position. This is one where I didn't change out purpose and focus. I left them the same. The unit number. Here's my wattage. I have instrument type as well, which isn't necessarily important. There's where the position, the color, and then these don't have a gobos. And then I didn't have any notes for these, so I didn't have notes on this particular piece of paper. The next one is the cue sheet. And your cue sheet is literally just a list of the cues you are writing for the show. This one's a little bit different, or a little bit difficult, because most designers don't actually write out their cues either before or during a show. And so this one's actually, this one's a little bit harder to do, but it should literally just include the cue number, the page that you want the cue to be on, what the cue is doing specifically, what channels, this is another one where your Magic Sheet comes in very handy, what channels are affected, and then what intensities those channels are going to, and then how long the cue is. All right, that's it. The next part of this presentation will be, I'm going to go through this entire process with you. I'm going to be creating a lighting key, and then I'll go from the creation of the lighting key all the way through the light plot, through all of the paperwork, and I'll be creating that as we go. So move on to the next video. Thank you.